Okay, so really cheery welcome to you all for this Wholehearted Leadership Network event. Some of you I know, some of you I haven't met before. A warm welcome to all of you. A little bit about why the Wholehearted Leadership Network, what's it about. The idea is that we create an online community where people can become inspired and encouraged by people who have and are fully stepping into their leadership. Why do we need that? Speaking personally, as I look out into the world, I don't see the kind of leadership that I want to see in the world. I want to see more wholeness. What do I mean by wholeness? By wholeness, I mean the willingness to do the work on yourself so that you can get beyond your shadows or have more awareness of the shadows that might be operating in your leadership. Wholeness in terms of connecting with one another, and wholeness to the whole what's going on the planet and the environment, so that we become more whole in our thinking. And also being more heart-centered, leading from the heart, checking in with what your heart desires and what this world really needs. So this is a space for people to come together and be inspired. And one way in which we do that is by asking guest speakers to come along and speak about what really matters to them. And today we have Paul Howell. Paul, just give us a wave. Really pleased to have Paul here talking to us about presence. Because when Paul and I got talking about this, if you are to become more whole, if you are to become more heart-centered, what does that get you? What's the result of that? Where we got to in our conversation was this idea of you're just more present. You're more present in your leadership. And the power of that for those people around you that you're leading is huge. So Paul's here today to talk about presence, and presence being an embodied state of mind. So I'll let him talk you through that in a moment with his talk. And I thought I'd just do a little bit of question and answer, 5 minutes, just to give you an idea as to who is Paul and what's his story and what he brings today. So Paul, you have a wealth of experience in the world. My interaction with you has been a few years ago when I was considering coming on the deep nature immersion, the vision quest that you run, which I know somebody here has already done. And then we had a LinkedIn interaction recently. We were looking at teams, talking about psychological safety in teams, and had a real good conversation about that. But can you tell these guys a little bit about the work that you're doing in the world?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you very much for the invite, Tim. And thanks everybody for making time in your busy days and your busy lives to come along and sit and have a chat with us. It's always a bit strange for me to end up in these kinds of forums doing this, because I don't think I ever really, well, I know I didn't consciously intend to ever become a coach, let alone a psychotherapist or a facilitator or speaker, etc. It's just something that kind of, it feels in a way that it kind of happened to me, and then I kind of woke up to the fact it was happening to me and started taking it more seriously, which is something I'm still practicing. So generally, literally yesterday, I spent a day in the mountains with a good friend of mine, Nima, who's a Sherpa, and that was my kind of day reset after running a 10-day program here in Scotland, in Findhorn, deep nature immersion, which is, some people call it Vision Quest, but it's quite an intense undertaking. It's 3 or 4 days preparation, then 4 days off on your own in the wilderness, drinking just water, really basic shelter, a time of deep solitude, reflection, and then 3 or 4 days of incorporation of kind of making sense of that experience for yourself, and then, getting clear about what you want to take back into the world with you. So that's something that I do once a year. I work as a somatic psychotherapist and a generative coach, including some kind of third generation hypnosis that kind of falls into that work, generative trance, it would be called, or systemic trance. And I work with all kinds of people. I've worked with, I've been doing this since 1997. So I've worked with people from all walks of life, experiencing all kinds of challenges, with all kinds of dreams and desires that they wanted to step into. And I find it just an incredibly challenging, demanding, and profoundly creative endeavor. And it's probably been that endeavor that's shaped me and made me the person I am, for better and worse. So it's an ongoing process for me, and I really feel that I'm in this line of work because, I guess there are several kind of facets to it. The world is an incredibly beautiful place. I've been very privileged to travel far and wide over extended periods of time. And I've spent time with various cultures, indigenous cultures, contemporary cultures, spent a lot of time out in wilderness locations. And when I see the kinds of dynamics that are constellating now and have been for a long time, that are destructive or degenerative, I might say, I really feel a sense of responsibility to respond to that and do what I can with my skills, my experience, my knowledge, my own stories, to try and bring more coherence, more understanding, not just of our responsibility, but for our potential. So I don't see this as oh my God, everything's broken, we've got to put it right, we've got to fix it. I tend to stay away from trying to see things as problems that need fixing. And look for the generative potential in the issues as they present, and see them as an invitation to kind of look a bit deeper, but also with a very, to help us clarify what's really important to us, what our core values are personally, and how we might kind of live those more. So that's essentially what this talk's going to be about.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And you guys are going to have a chance to ask questions of Paul after the talk and after the interactive activity that he's got set up for you. So if you do have any questions, write them down. Paul has suggested you might want to have a piece of paper and pen close at hand. He's not using a slide pack today, so if you want to use capture any of his thoughts, please do. So I think, Paul, we should crack on, don't you?
Great, sounds good to me. All
right, so I'll hand over to Paul now. Any questions, any problems you have with any technical difficulties, just send me a private message and I'll see if I can help. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, welcome again, everybody. I guess my style is pretty informal, and I like it to be interactive. So please do write down any questions so that we can have that conversation at the end. What I'm going to try and encapsulate are some of the core principles and practices that I use every day as a psychotherapist, as a facilitator, as a coach, whether that's in organizational settings or one-to-one settings. And they are the things that have made a difference to me personally. The things that I've learned from some brilliant teachers over many years, from my own reflections and my own kind of ongoing healing, growth, exploration of what it means to be a human. One of the things that I kind of focus my primary attention on in any interaction where there's a significant outcome, where there could be significant consequences. So whether that's for a client in psychotherapy or for a group of people, is the body is the first attention. So I understand that we as human beings have kind of various kinds of intelligence that we can access at any one time. And ideally, these various kinds of intelligence work together and they are aligned and they are harmonious. Most often they are not. Most often we experience some kind of conflict. And so this idea of presence as an embodied state of mind is really about how do we align with our core values, and not just from an intellectual perspective, not just this, what I would call this thing between our ears, the cognitive rational intellect, the brain, and usually the prefrontal left cortex, which likes to make things line up. 1 + 1 = 2 to the prefrontal cortex. If you say 1 + 1 = a lemon to the prefrontal cortex, it doesn't really understand it. It's going to be confused and have a bit of a wobble probably. But there are deeper layers of consciousness that we carry where things do make sense when they are symbolic. And so 1 + 1 = 11 might make sense to the deeper parts of us. And that's what I'm going to be speaking a little bit about. So as a general set of kind of understandings and presuppositions that I work from, I imagine that we have this thing, the brain, incredibly powerful, and it has certain kinds of skills that it is absolutely the best source of intelligence for: imagining the future, remembering the past, trying to take things apart and put them back in different ways, you know, trying to update our filters of perception, you might say. And then we have our emotional center. So this sense of, you know, emotions being experiences that we have in the body. They might be pleasurable or they might be uncomfortable, but if we are paying attention to our emotions, if we are attuned to them, we might say, then we generally can name them. We can get pretty close and we can say, well, I feel really happy about that, or I'm really sad about that, or I'm really angry about that, or I'm kind of a bit pissed off about, you know, whatever it is. And that's the emotional layer. So cognitive, rational intellect, then the emotional layer. And then if we practice, we can get down into the body, into the realm of somatic intelligence, which is this, you know, usually starts out in our gut. We've heard everyone talk about gut feel, intuition, closer to instinct, perhaps. And how that shows up is what I might call a resonant felt sense. So that there's not really so much a sense of emotion, but a deep sense of presence that helps us hold the emotion and any thoughts that we might have about those emotions. And that's really what I would see as being the foundations of what I'm calling presence. So presence as an embodied state of mind is something that we can cultivate. It's something that we can practice, and it's something that we can get better at, depending on how much we want to do that, you know, whether we really have an intention to do that.
So Paul?
Yes, mate.
Just going to frame this a little bit. So
sure.
Why in people's leadership, whether that's in an organization or in their own life, through their relationships, why are you suggesting they go to this more somatic, intuitive gut place?
Well, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. It's the next thing on my notes. So we are attuned, Tim. We're aligned. Human beings are relational creatures, and there is nothing you can do to turn that off. You can numb it out, you can avoid it, you can diminish it, you can try and dominate it and control the quality of your relationships. And we all do that to a certain extent all the time. But there's nothing we can do to turn it off. We need each other at a very fundamental level to survive. But beyond survival, we need each other to learn, to grow, to heal, to feel like we belong in the world. And to feel that we are part of something larger than just our own little ideas, our own little, you know, worldview. In terms of why is it important, or why do I believe it's important for people to kind of cultivate this deeper sense of presence? I don't think it's more relevant I think leadership, it's really highly relevant, because if you're leading in any context, whether that is in your family, whether that is your kids, whether that is in an organizational setting at any level, for any intention, you kind of become a tuning fork. So people around you will be looking at you as an example, and they will be having this cognitive rational understanding and this kind of judgment of whether they think you're a good leader or a bad leader. But at perhaps a somatic level, at an unconscious level even, we might say, in this embodied felt sense way, they will trust you and they will respect you, or they won't. And that will largely be based on what we might call instinct. So in terms of the values that we as leaders and as individuals cultivate, if we are not aligned with those values, if we are not embodying those values, if we are not resonating with those values, we end up with this, these lofty espoused values, the things we say we think we are, the things we say we think are important. But then our operational values, the things we actually do and the ways we behave, will probably contradict that. And then we start seeing this gap in what we say and what we do, and we're out of alignment. And we then are a dissonant force within a team, within an organization, within a family, where we're actually unconsciously creating conflict, because that conflict is in ourselves, and we're starting to, people will notice that, whether they say they do or not. Did you have another question there, Tim?
No, I just think that frames it nicely. If anyone else wants to jump in with any question at any point, you're okay with that, right, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Just do a raised hand if you want to come in with a question.
So coming back to this notion that we are relational creatures, we are fundamentally animals, and we are pack animals, and it's the quality of our relationships that define the outcome of any group endeavor. It's not necessarily what's happening with the individuals, it's the quality of the space that we can create between us. So if we're not clear on our values, if we're vague on our values, but we are trying to force them into something, we're trying to perform something that isn't actually authentic to us, that will ripple out, that will have consequences. So the clearer we can be of our values, and the more aligned we can be with them intellectually, emotionally, and somatically, the more relaxing it is for us, for one, the more enjoyable it is for us, for another. We feel more authentic, we feel more aligned, and that gives other people permission to copy us, to, we might say, resonate with us. Does that make sense, Tim? Just a bit of a sense check before I carry on. Yeah, cool.
Everybody else, just check if this is making sense. Give me a thumbs down. If it's not, if you want to come in, please do.
Don't let me talk psychobabble if it's not going down well.
Yeah, go for it.
So coming into this, to explore the idea of how we come into relationship very briefly. There are 3 key stages to any relationship. And the first one is simply to connect. So Tim and I, we connect via email, and I know Tim lives in the world and I live in the world, and we exchange some words, and and I'm trying to work out what he wants, and he's trying to work out who I am, and if he wants anything I might have. And we're just in that kind of basic connection. We're just kind of like sussing each other out. If we stay in that conversation and we keep the conversation going, and I actually listen to what Tim's saying, I might hear Tim tell me what's important to him, and he might be explicit about that, or he might be a little bit implicit and make it interesting for me to work it out. But if I listen, he will tell me. And if Tim then listens to me, we end up having this conversation, which I think is the kind of conversation we had when I was sitting in my car last time I was heading over to the Highlands, where we're like, oh, we're attuned. We share some similar values here. And we share some important values together. So what does that mean? What might we do with that? So we have connection is the first step, and then we have attunement is the second step. The third step is what we call resonance. So if any of you have heard of a guy called Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, speaking about trauma resolution, yoga, talking about how to regulate the central nervous system, he would talk about limbic resonance. And this is the pre-verbal layer of consciousness that all humans share, and is really the first way we communicate anything to anybody. It's not woo-woo hippie BS. It's science, it's physiology, it's biology. So if you imagine that your central nervous system is dysregulated, and you're not really clear in what your ideas are, and you're just trying to play a role identity, as I might call it, you're trying to perform to get some strokes or get some attention, but you're not really aligned with the values that you say you are aligned with, that's going to be very dissonant. So you might be speaking from the cognitive, rational, intellect and sound brilliant, but people will feel that you're not being authentic. they will feel a mismatch between who you are trying to present yourself as and who you actually are. And you will feel it too. You will know, this idea of imposter syndrome, I think is really comes out of this place of people not taking time to embody their values, to really explore what they are in an embodied way. Because we can all say what our core values are at a superficial level, but to really embody them so we feel them as a natural source of guidance and inspiration for ourselves, especially when things are challenging, I think that takes a little bit more work and a little bit more skill, perhaps. So I would say presence. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't I ask these lovely people, what do you think presence is? Anyone want to take a stab at what presence might be for them? Perhaps stab isn't the best word to use in this context.
Josh.
Yeah, so for me, you kind of touched on this already, but listening is the first thing that I do if I want to be with someone, physically and sort of on a more emotional level, because if I listen, I have the opportunity to put aside the thoughts which continually go out in my mind and sort of get their internal feed for a bit. And that helps me, that kind of resonance thing that you're talking about, it helps me pick up on the flow of information that's going through their brain. And then I can see any patterns. Sometimes I overanalyze that kind of thing happening, but giving it a space just to listen to what comes out from them and what they want to tell me, it helps me to match up with them a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else? Don't be shy.
JD.
Staying in the moment and not time traveling.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Kind of not getting ahead of ourselves, not trying to filter things through past experiences, just being with what is actually happening here and now. Absolutely. Any more?
Jeremy. You're on mute. Can't hear you, Jeremy.
Sorry, I've got a double mute. I've got one on the headphone and one on the screen. There now. I think responding appropriately as well. So many people will look like they're listening and then they don't respond appropriately. They respond about themselves rather than responding to the discussion that's there. So presence, you can really tell it when someone responds to the thing that the other person has just said, which doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. So that's a great example of that mismatch, right? So where you can kind of like dress yourself up, put this mask on of being really as if you're already there, and you're right. I mean, it's happened several times this week where there's one conversation happening and someone responds from a completely different perspective. And you're like, oh, okay.
Lee, how's it?
Well, yeah, just as a add-on, really, I do some intuitive work with horses, and horses are just fantastic. Their hearts are about 4 times bigger than ours, so their electromagnetic field is bigger than ours. So they are. I was just with them on Friday, so it's very grounding. So I think there's this beautiful sense of grounding when you're present in the pause. And one of the things we do is we can actually intuitively ask the horse a question from our head, our heart, and our gut, and the horse responds very differently. So really beautiful art of listening both ways. But I think nature for me is probably where, or what involved with any ecosystem, is when we can get really beautifully present in the now.
Yeah.
And allow that in the pause is when it slows us down, doesn't it? So there's that beautiful being able to receive as well as give, I think, in the pause.
Yeah, so understanding that these different layers of intelligence travel at different speeds. So the cognitive rational intellect moves really quickly. It's very mercurial, wants to understand things and get to an answer, likes actually to have problems so that it can feel good about having an answer. Whereas to really settle into attunement and resonance, as you were just speaking about, that takes a little bit longer to allow ourselves to settle in and settle down. And it roughly takes, if anybody has tried kind of a sitting meditation or any version of kind of just mindfulness practice, it generally takes about 15 minutes for the body to relax and kind of come to this place where it can consider that there's nowhere to go and there's nothing to do. That my job right now, my task is to just slow down, settle in, settle down, not try and get ahead of myself, trust that there's a deeper level of intelligence that's looking to wake up and participate more fully in this conversation. So that's a discipline. And as I say, we can cultivate that with the practice.
Paul, just want to come in there. Can you just say again the title of that book around resonance?
Oh, it's a book around trauma, and it's The Body Keeps the Score. So he's specifically talking about PTSD rather than complex post-traumatic disorder, and his work as a psychiatrist and what working with veterans from the Vietnam War taught him. There's some great talks online that he's done that speak to that too.
And the author?
Bessel van der Kolk.
Okay, can you just spell that for me?
Nope. He's Dutch.
Okay.
I can.
Yeah, great. Go on.
It's BSSEL.
Yeah.
Van. DER for dare, and then Kolk, KOLK.
Thank you.
I have to have some purpose.
Thanks, Nina. I missed the first name, but I'm sure you get it from.
Okay, it's Bessel, BESSEL, Bessel.
Yeah.
Okay.
He has a great talk on the On Being podcast. If anyone wants to check that out, I thoroughly recommend it. So presence is all of those things, right? So to actually be present is quite a lot of work to start out with. But the dividends will save you an enormous amount of time and an enormous amount of confusion by trying to get somewhere that you're not really congruent with.
Paul, can I just ask a question of the group?
Sure.
Which could be just in the chat box. As you think about the way in which you lead, whether that's as a parent, manager, self-leadership, what takes you out of presence? So what that you're aware of typically takes you out of presence. Just type some of those into chat box. So Paul, don't think you can see those in the chat box coming through. Okay, and it could be worthwhile thinking, when was the last time when you were not present in communication with somebody, in relating to somebody? When was the last time you weren't present? And then perhaps have a think about what the impact of that was.
It's got me thinking about something actually, Tim, of just what Paul was saying there about mindfulness. And I think we've been doing quite a bit of practice with doing this program, and it's so hard to maintain. So I think part of presence for me is awareness and noticing when I've left it, because it's really hard to tell sometimes that when you're trying really hard to be present, that it's slipped away. You know, I've spoke to people in groups about it, you know, about the voice in their heads, and, you know, had that funny moment of saying, you know, if your voice in your head has just said, you haven't got one, then that was it. Yeah, and noticing that you've slipped away is just like mindfulness practice and coming back. So for me, it's a really imperfect practice, but in a forgiving kind of a way.
Thanks, Sally. Paul, over to you.
Great. Oh, that's a great comment. So trying to be present to this understanding of presence, and wanting to work with, you know, what's actually here and what's coming through on those these little messages. So a large part of my work has been working with trance and extraordinary states of consciousness, right? So trance, if you think about hypnosis as a skill set, trance is the artifact of hypnosis. We all go into trance once every 10 minutes at least, where we kind of go somewhere and we don't really realize we've left and we don't realize we've come back. And that's some kind of physiological, neurological, you know, process happening. Kind of, I like to think, just catching up with ourselves. You might experience it like a mini daydream. Or, you know, oh, sorry, what were you saying? When you really were interested in what someone was saying and you really are present, they say something that kind of lights up your nervous system and your neurology is, oh, wow, that's interesting. And I have to leave you for a second and go deeply within myself to make sense of it, or to grasp it, or to find some kind of way of holding that in my consciousness. And so with a lot of mindfulness practices, the expectation that you are going to be like really clearly focused for 100% of the time, I think is a bit of a red herring, because it tries to go against our nature of having this kind of like, you know, I'm just going to take a micro holiday from the reality out there and go to my own internal reality and upgrade it a little bit. Everything that everybody has said in terms of what takes them out of presence is interesting for me, because we are the implicit suggestion in presence and embodied state of mind in the context of this conversation about leadership, and leadership being an endeavor to, you know, to create some meaningful space in the outside world. I think the implicit notion is that this is about being present to what's out there. But on the flip side, I can't really ask the question without answering it. So it's really most important for us to be deeply present to ourselves, I think, is the point of presence as an embodied state of mind. You know, and mind as an infinite array of relational connections, our mind, the group mind, whatever that is. But we have to start with ourselves. So it's not until we really start practicing that and really give that our attention that we notice how often we're not there, you know, or we start noticing what is there that we might not like. So this idea of being present is not a trivial undertaking. If you really want to be present to another person and remain present, maybe for the course of a meeting, maybe for the course of a lifelong relationship, understand that the quality of that presence is organic, that it's going to change, that it's going to have certain phases, that it's going to flow and flux, and sometimes it'll feel really intense and sometimes it'll feel really spacious. And your understanding and your appreciation for where you are in that process is unique to you. And the way you do it will be completely different than the way anybody else does it, even if you think you agree and you've got similarities. Your process, your needs, your way of cultivating it, your way of practicing it, who you choose to give it to. You might not choose to be present to some people, and that is totally okay for really good reasons, right? You might want to withdraw your sense of presence from them. They're all valid reasons for leaving. Please don't see them as problems. My experience is that seeing things as a, you know, how does this relate to my larger intention? If I spend time exploring it, does that take me closer to my larger intention, or is it in fact a distraction? You know, if it's something that's really important, it'll come back and keep tapping you on the shoulder till you look at it. But if it's not serving your intentions in a generative way, in a creative way, and that is to say that you feel that there's more of you at the end of that process than there was at the start of it in the world, that you've grown a little bit, that you've learned a little bit, that you've understood a little bit more about yourself and those around you. My suggestion would be just stick it on the back burner, leave it for another day. What else do I want to say that feels relevant and important at this stage? So we're relational creatures. We can't turn it off. If we're going to be here with other people, it's good to have some skills, and it's good to actually be here, right? It's probably good for us and for the people that we share our time and our lives with, that we are actually present. So as Josh said, listening, understanding that when we meet another person, really in the most fundamental sense, to get to know that person in the moment that we're with them, we have to kind of let go of our preconceived ideas about what might be happening for them, especially if you're in a leadership context, especially if you're leading change, especially if you're trying to drive change. We like to think that we are far more fixed in our sense of identity than we actually are. We're all work in progress. We're all evolving, and sometimes we devolve, and I think that's part of the gig too. I don't think it's actually a bad thing. So I wanted to ask, as kind of a little bit of an exercise in the context of leadership, if you could all think of a value. Talking of presence, do you meditate or practice mindfulness? Myself, I wouldn't call it, sorry, and this is from Ross, I have a daily practice that I would call generative trance. And so and I'm about to invite you to undergo the similar kind of thing. So rather than answer that question, Ross, I'm gonna kind of start guiding us into it, if that's okay. Thinking of leadership, thinking of a situation, a context, a place in your life where you would like to feel a deeper sense of alignment, where you'd like to feel more present, more resourceful, more attuned, more open, whatever those words are for you. Just think of a situation as a particular scenario. It can be a big one, can be a small one. And take a couple of moments just to let one of those come to you and settle in your mind. Yeah, if you're comfortable closing your eyes, then that's helpful for some people. If not, that's not a problem. And when you've got that scenario, become curious about what kind of values are most important in that scenario. What values do you feel are most important in that scenario? You might think of that as, what's guiding that interaction? What's your deep intention? And now my invitation is that you just take a few breaths and you relax into that, and you kind of get a sense for what that feels like in your body. So when you say those words and you think of that scenario, what happens in your body? This thing below your neck, this deep reservoir of somatic intelligence. 13 billion years worth of evolution compared to a mere 300,000 years of evolution of your prefrontal left cortex, your brain. And so you might want to breathe into your belly, feel your feet on the ground. Have a little bit of a fidget if that's helpful. And imagine that your body and your mind are in a conversation whilst you hold this in your awareness, this value, this guiding principle. And as you become aware of this guiding principle, this value, Be really curious about what's actually happening in your body, this idea of the felt sense. Does it have a temperature? Does it have a sense of movement? Is it stationary? Does it feel pleasant? Does it feel a bit gnarly? Does it feel, how does it feel as a physiological sensation? How would you describe it? And at this layer, we start to come into language gets a bit slippy. And we have to say, well, it's like this, or it's a bit like that. And it starts, or it has the potential to become a little bit metaphorical. My next question is, how does this value or this guiding principle serve you personally? How does it support you? We're not trying too hard here. We're trying to relax into this process and be curious with an open mind, whilst noticing whatever it is we notice in our body. So how does it serve you personally? And then in any context, you might rely on it. How does it serve the world that you carry this? That this is part of the ripple effect you create where you go, with the words you say, with the actions, with your attention and your intention. And now my invite is to imagine this value, this guiding principle, has some movement to it. You might imagine yourself as a tuning fork with this particular resonant somatic intelligence just radiating out from you. There's no great effort necessary here. It's in your nature to do this. And this conversation is just helping you align and be more aware of it. Maybe kind of like polishing it, sharpening it, cleaning off the dust. And now my invite is that you think of a scenario that you'll be in the next days or weeks, where it would be really important for this value to be front and center for you and for those that you're with. And notice what you notice about that scenario. How is that scenario enhanced when you are deeply embodying this guiding principle, this value? And then you might want to reflect on the outcome. What happened as a consequence of you carrying this value consciously, mindfully, resonantly, in a relaxed way, in an open way, but in a very present way, in a way that you trust it completely. And then I invite you to be curious about the people that you're with, people that you interact with, and be curious about how they might be expressing the same value or similar values in a different way. How they might express it in slightly different language to you, how they might express it in slightly different behavior. But the core principle is resonant with your core principle, that they are attuned. And again, in the context of leadership, imagine half a dozen people with an attuned and resonant sense of a shared value, aligned with your mission, whatever that is. And see what kind of ripple, or imagine what kind of ripple that makes in the world. Imagine what kind of relational field might start to constellate amongst a bunch of people who do that. Multiple expressions of a similar generative value system. Creative, curious, committed, wise enough to slow down, wise enough to reflect, to pause, to invite feedback, and yet fierce enough to set clear boundaries to protect those value systems, to maintain their sharpness and their clarity. So in terms of a practice, my practice, daily practice, whatever I'm doing, and sometimes multiple times a day, especially if I'm trying to do something particularly clever, I know I need to slow down, more tortoise, less hare. I need to attune to my own physiological state without getting hooked into too many stories about what that is. Attune to my environment, attune to my breathing, attune to the quality of the thoughts that I'm having. Are they the kinds of thoughts that are going to serve me moving into the next thing I want to do? Or are they just going to create more confusion? And understand I have a choice about that. Understand that if my, what the Jungians call chronic subjectivity, the things that I habitually think about when I'm not thinking about something particular, the places my mind drifts to, a lot of that stuff just isn't useful. It's just old background noise. I have a choice about tuning that out to tune in something more meaningful for me, more resonant, that I'm more aligned with. So I don't always have to feel it when I remember it. I often don't. But I understand that there's a deeper layer to me that if I spend time to connect with, it comes alive in all of me. And then I don't have to talk about it or justify it. It's just part of who I am. And it travels with me. And it tends to attract and inspire people who have similar desire to inhabit themselves in a similar way, even if they express it completely differently. And so rather than having conflict in that way, we end up with lots of complementary opposite value systems. And it becomes a bit more of a dance in this kind of chaotic maelstrom that looks very busy and might sound very purposeful, but actually is not integrating and not achieving much. It's trying to, it kind of tends to create problems that help us feel good about creating the superficial problems we've created, rather than any deeper, meaningful value system being born into the world. How are we doing for time, Tim?
Hey, Paul. Perfect. Let's give these guys an opportunity to break out now into a different space, into the breakout room. So you've heard what Paul has to say on what he means in terms of the quality of the relationships, to connect, to attune, to resonate, the importance of resonating at through our limbic system and nervous system. Talked about the imposter syndrome and how that could come from not taking the time to embody these values. Really nice. Well, I'll just capture a quote from you there, Paul. Wise enough to slow down, to pause, to ask for feedback, yet fierce enough to protect those boundaries. Just relaying some of what Paul's been saying to you. And you've had a chance to check in with yourself now around your value, where it might resonate in your body. You may have got something from that. You may not have been a bodily thing. It may have stayed up here, the head thing, and that's all for this discussion you're about to have. So, Paul, are you giving them any specific question to take into the breakout room?
I'm curious to know how that was as a process, and I guess for the purposes of learning, the most useful questions to come back with were where people got stuck, what they're still curious about, if they feel that there are any missing pieces for them. So I share how it was for you. Any thoughts and reflections upon this process of connecting, attuning, and resonating with other people, and that's a skill and that takes time to cultivate. If you think it would be useful, I guess. It's a good question. Okay, Paul, so thank you. I'm going to put you guys now into a breakout room. There's 4 rooms. You'll be with 3 or 4 people in your room. So if you can, have your camera on for this bit, it'd be great. So those other people can connect with you. And I'm going to give you 15 minutes for this. Okay, there we go. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Now in the main session.
You're in the main session. Great to have you back. Okay, so a good opportunity there to talk about your experience, from what Paul guided you through, to talk about where some of the blocks might have been, and whatever else came up. So we've got about 5 minutes just to share. Anyone who wants to share to the group on anything that came up for them that we thought we could all benefit from.
We're all enlightened and we can go home.
Job done, Paul. Your work is done. Okay, so we've got a question and answer session now for Paul. Anyone got any questions for Paul? Give me a hands up if you want to ask him anything in particular. Ross has a question, then we'll go to Jeremy and then Josh.
How long do we have, Tim?
Thank you for the question. Let's go 8 minutes in total.
Okay, so I'll try and rattle through this because it might be a bit of a convoluted one. So I'm going to draw on your generative trance experience here, Paul. So truth and freedom are a couple of core values that I hold dear. And I think if promoted, will enhance the now and the future for us as and any descendants. So at the moment, I feel a supreme distrust of many of the elite and leaders, and yet living in the so-called West, I have the relative freedom to explore these relative aspects of society. So therefore, if I had to choose, I would like to prioritize spreading of deep trust throughout society. So just on deep trust is a concept that I foresee promoting in society. I think it would be an extremely fun and gratifying experience, and I'd like to think it would be a morally transcendent experience or offering. This would be time and thought given to exploring an individual's truth and purpose. So I've perhaps not landed on the correct way to brand or succinctly sum up there, but maybe I have. And I really need feedback, or ideally others on board to refine. But anyway, the morally transcendent experience will seek to create a trusting bond between participants and give the participants knowledge of how to recognize others that have partaken in their offering. So I feel that a network of bonded, trusted others that seeks deep trust would be a supreme force for good. So to conclude, I would, without hesitation, vote for or give custom to one that has made their offering of deep trust. So sorry, I had to paint a picture a little bit there, but my question is, how would you endeavour to start a global initiative to promote truth through deep trust? And where to start? And yeah, I would welcome any connection to explore this offline if it's of interest, because I know it's a big topic.
So the first thing I would say is that it's subjective, right? And it's context specific. So deep truth, however deep it goes, if we really explore our values and our beliefs, which are slightly different, but they underpin our sense of identity. So the quality of relationship is primary, because your truth and my truth could both be deep and opposite. And I think that's how nature wants it and needs it to be. Otherwise, we don't end up with anything other than a very enmeshed society that's trying to avoid tricky situations. I think the invitation in conflict is for creativity. So I would approach any endeavor where you're trying to get a large group of people to communicate respectfully and openly for the sake of learning about themselves and the world around them. You have to look at the relational dynamics as a primary objective, and to enhance that capacity. And that will always start with a person's, if I need to go into a situation where people are not going to like me, which for some strange reason I seem to enjoy, because I really think that where there's more conflict, there's more available energy for transformation, there's more available energy for creativity. It's like an invite to go and have fun for me in some bizarre twisted universe that I seem to inhabit sometimes. You have to be really good at mirroring people to themselves in a way that's respectful and that isn't overwhelming to them, because there is such a phenomenal amount of unprocessed trauma in the world at the moment, especially in the West, that until you make space for that to be part of the conversation and have a place in the conversation and understand the kinds of dynamics that will come out of people in those conversations, whilst it sounds like a fantastic idea, it's probably going to come down to a long, slow process with some people who are really seriously able of stewarding that and who are committed to staying in the room, especially when they don't feel they want to be, for the sake of learning. And it kind of blows out the window any idea of safety as a predicate. If you're trying to make a space that is safe for people, you fall into the parenting trap. And we need people to be more mature and more resilient and more resourceful rather than feel safe, so that they can handle difference. So they can see the potential in difference. So they can harvest the potential in difference. So you go, oh, wow, Ross got this completely radically different opposite perspective for me. But I can think of these contexts where it'd be really useful for me to practice a little bit of that too. And then you have this much richer information exchange, understanding exchange, and appreciation for how diverse life actually is.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Ross, for that question.
Thank you very much.
Move on to Jeremy.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that. I've got a quicker question. So in all the years of doing this, when I noticed from the exercise that actually the first step was the one that I found hardest, of really truly understanding what my values were, what did I want to think about, what was my focus, and throughout my working life I've gone through multiple stages where I've believed in different values as trying to understand what's important at the time. In your experience in all of the 20, 30 years you've been doing this, how well do you think people engage with that first step, and are people very good at really understanding what their core values are, or do they even pull the wool over their own eyes as to what they think their values are, maybe by what they aspire to be rather than what they genuinely believe in their gut?
Great question. I think it depends on whether people are in what I would call a pathologically adolescent stage of development, where they are trying to fit in to the culture around them for a sense of safety and belonging, and therefore a derived sense of identity and value for their personhood, or whether they are able to tolerate not fitting in order to really align with their own personal deep values. And that's a really big personal journey for anyone to undergo, is to risk, I might piss people off and they might not like me, and they might actually shun me and separate me from a place that I really value and maybe even need for my emotional, psychological survival, in order to follow my own deep longing and embody my own deep values, which might be completely different. Or they might not be completely the antithesis of these values, but they might still not be welcome. They might actually, if I embody these values, it might threaten these people and their equilibrium. So context is everything, right? Context is everything. And in the little breakout room I was in, Joe was asking me, so can you go against your own values in order to stay with a group of people? And probably yes, for a short period of time. But if you are constantly abandoning yourself in order for a sense of belonging, you're kind of abandoning yourself, and will likely become confused after a while.
So it's a wonderful answer. I think I just want to come back to the small one, is that in your observation, did you observe people were good at doing that or not?
Some people are very good at it, and some people are not very good at it. And some people want it, but find it very difficult for the reasons that I've just want to try to elucidate, which is it's a big risk. So the espoused value is I want to embody my values and these things are important to me. But when push comes to shove, if it means my relationship might go down the pan or my career might go down the pan, I'm going to reconsider.
Yeah, okay, excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Jeremy. We've got time for one more question. Josh.
Hi, so I just got a little bit on that one for Jeremy. With the values, it doesn't feel like it's just, for me, it doesn't feel like it's whether or not it's just me and another group that I'm trying to conform to. But when I was doing values work for myself, there was one which came up as awareness. And at the beginning, I thought that I valued awareness, a bit like I idealized having, if I had awareness as one of my values, then it just seemed like something I wanted to have more of in my life. But after reflecting on it week after week, I kind of dropped it away. So I wasn't trying to fit into a group, but I was more trying to encourage myself to value awareness more. So it was a strange dynamic of me trying to fit the ideal version of what I thought was myself compared to the values that I deeply hold on the inside. So it took a bit of work to at first say, this is what I value, and then discard some of those and replace them with ones which I actually live by after reflecting sort of over the longer term. That's just what I felt on my heart, so I needed to share that bit. But my question is related to the deep nature emotion. I have two best friends who are like brothers, and I'm wondering if the immersion is a place for someone to go individually, or if it would cater for 3 best friends to go and have a not shared experience, a shared experience, but also have that solitude moment so that then after we could reflect on it. So yeah. I wonder if it has a space for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a bunch of people who want to invest in that, it is an individual. It's a very much an individual process on a collective journey. So if it deepens your understanding of yourself and you get to share that with people that you're close with, and you all do that, I think it makes for a very rich invitation. So,
thanks, Paul. Thanks, Joshua.
Thank you very much.
Paul, any offerings for these guys? Anything you want to let them know about that you're doing?
Just super quick. Those last few questions, I can encapsulate a very quick answer into the process of becoming a mature leader, a generative leader, a wholehearted leader, is to move your values inside of you and to be able to hold them deeply within you, so that your center of gravity is firmly within your body, your mind, your soul, your heart, your spirit, whatever you want to call it, that it lives within you, and that it's stable in there, but you understand it's going to be organic over the course of your life, and that you can reference that in any other external conversation, and you can be open to changing it, but you know where you start and you know where you finish. And the center of gravity is not in a million people out there. It's not in the culture, it's not in society, it's not in your politicians. It's deeply rooted within you, and you do the work every day to make sure that those values are resonant for you, that you enjoy them, that they create health in your life. So that would be the shift, the simple shift of, a shift in the location of your gravity as a human being. Offerings, I'm going to be in Nepal sometime next year. I don't quite know when, but there's the prospect of a deep nature immersion at altitude out in the Khumbu region with my friend Nima guiding, who's been to the top of Everest 7 times, I think. He's only 5'3". I mean.
And Paul, what's your website? Can you just put it into the chat box?
www.pauljhowell.com. There's a newsletter on there if you want the updated version of me, which changes quite frequently. Sign up to the newsletter, and I send something out probably every 2 or 3 months. Yeah, one-to-one coaching, group stuff, nature stuff, consultancy. I like to keep it diverse. So
great. So I'm just going to launch this poll, folks. Just before you go, if you want to connect with Paul specifically, if you want to speak with me more about the Wholehearted Leadership Network, what it is that Wholehearted Leadership is all about, if you want to connect with us both, there's a choice in there. If no, not this time, just click on no. We will not be offended in any way. What I'm really, really, really pleased about is see you all here. The fact that you guys are interested, what we're talking about resonates with you in some way. Personally gives me great heart to continue this work and to grow this work and to start more of these kinds of conversations. So I hope to see you back for the next Wholehearted Leadership Network. I'll send you some details about the next one. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, for being present. Can we all give Paul a round of applause?
Well, thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, I hope you find it useful. If you've got any questions for me, please feel free to just ping me an email. I'll do my best to not confuse you.
Great stuff. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
See you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Go well. Ciao, ciao. Hey, Tim.
Hey, Paul. Jeremy, okay? Hey, I just removed him. I know Jeremy, so I felt okay, I could do that. Thank you, Paul. Brilliant.
Is that all right?
Yeah, let me just stop that recording.